the white polluters and the white environmentalists are essentially steering poison into the people of color communities because they don't have a racial justice frame.
That was just one of many controversial statements made by, I was going to say White House advisor, former White House advisor Van Jones, that led to him resigning overnight.
Good Sunday to you. You're watching HLN News and Views. Hope you're having a great Labor Day weekend. I'm Susan Hendricks. Well, the man who President Obama tapped to help create millions of green jobs for the U.S. economy is now himself out of a job. President Obama's environmental advisor, Van Jones, resigned after coming under fire from conservative activists for signing an online petition in 2004. It asked for an investigation to determine whether the government played any role in allowing the 9/11 attacks to happen. Jones apologized and said he did not fully read the petition before signing it. One congressional Republican says it was time for Jones to go.
Well, I think Van Jones did the right thing. His extremist views and coarse rhetoric have no place in this administration. The administration did a disservice to Van Jones by appointing him to this high-ranking position without properly vetting him.
It certainly is the case that Van Jones had a history as a radical, as a self-professed communist, and also the fact that is that he signed a 2004 petition suggesting that there be an investigation of whether or not the government had a role in 9/11. On the other hand, he also was the author of a best-selling and what was considered a serious book called The Green Collar Economy. I think we all agree he had to go because of his political baggage. I guess the question is it good that he went?
I think it would have been better if he had been fired by the president once he found out more about Mr. Jones's background than waiting for him to resign. Of course, we all agreed that he had to go, but if you just read, I was amused by this fact, if you just read the New York Times, you would know you would know nothing about this. The mainstream media did not cover this story. You wouldn't learn about it on network news. The New York Times readers tomorrow morning are going to pick up the print New York Times and for the first time discover that there was a huge controversy about this radical who was at quite a high level of the White House. So it's an interesting case study, I think, where some of the blogs, a guy named Jim Hoft in St. Louis, Missouri, who runs a blog called Gateway Pundit, did much more reporting on this than the entire mainstream media.
I'm always asking this, was he a radical who didn't have a place in the White House, or was he somebody that had said some controversial things in the past but had some role to contribute?
Well, I think he had a role to contribute because he was a leader in this kind of green-collar jobs initiative. But his previous statements, and in particular, really, the number one thing, I think all the other things are objectionable, but look, signing a statement on the 9/11 attacks, that is the reason he is not in the White House today. And because of that, he couldn't continue effectively in his role working on environmental issues. I mean, I think it's pretty cut and dried. I think the White House took a couple days, not that long, to decide what they wanted to do. And by yesterday, or Friday, actually, you could read between the lines that they weren't giving him any support. And, you know, he got the message and he resigned. I mean, I think if he had stayed, he would have been a continued source of controversy, and the president would have had to defend somebody who thought the 9/11 attacks might not have been caused by al-Qaeda. And, or they would have had another round, which they're still going to get questions on, by the way, about why didn't they know he signed this petition before they hired him.
Well, and I think that's actually the key question here. I mean, remember, at the beginning of the administration, the transition, there was this lengthy questionnaire that nominees or opponents were forced to fill out by the Obama administration, separate from the FBI questionnaire. And on that, question number 61 has to do with this very issue. Have you been associated with any groups that would cause us embarrassment, that people could use to impugn your character? I'd be very interested to see from the most transparent administration in history what his response to that was. Maybe he didn't list that. I suspect he probably didn't. But if he did, why wasn't he gone, 48 hours ago?
Well, I don't think it's possible to defend Van Jones on the al-Qaeda, and the U.S. government being behind 9/11. It's just unbelievable. But at the same time, I'm struck by this in the sense that, look, this guy was not a high policy maker in the administration. This guy had a specific job in the environmental section in terms of green jobs, and that's what he was doing. Instead, he's being now beaten up as if he was a cabinet member. He's no cabinet member. He's not a significant player.
Wasn't he a czar?
He's a presidential advisor.
Czar. This is another part of this madness. Czar, all of a sudden, it's all about these czars. It looks to me like ways to attack the president is what we're really talking about. What we got with Van Jones was a guy who was going out and giving some, I think, hysterical speeches, and oftentimes to young people. Principally what the White House used him to do was talk to young people. He wasn't in charge even of the environmental issue in terms of policy in the White House. But when you stop, you can judge President Obama on this because he put him in position.
But let me ask you a question which I'm sure a lot of our viewers are screaming at the screen right now. If George W. Bush had someone who, not so many years ago, 3-4 years ago, had said, you know, I'm for school segregation.
That's a totally different issue.
Than saying that the U.S. was involved in 9/11?
I just said that was indefensible,
well,
Chris.
I know,
but to me, that is really beyond the pale. I didn't like it when he started talking about, you know, white corporations and calling people by derogatory names in front of audiences.
But is there another side to this?
The guy behaved badly, and he should have been chastened for it. But if you're asking me, as a matter of an appointee, a sort of mid-range appointee, who didn't have to be confirmed, I just don't see why we are spending time on a Sunday morning national talk show about this guy.
Can I just spend 20 more seconds on it? Valerie Jarrett is one of President Obama's closest friends and one of his closest, most senior White House advisors. She gave a speech earlier this year boasting about recruiting Van Jones for the White House. He was not an obscure person that President Obama and Valerie Jarrett didn't know. He was someone they went out of their way to bring into the White House, and they still need to explain why they did that.
Yeah, and look, the White House blog currently to this, right now, calls him a visionary. I mean, he's gone. They calls him a visionary.
Okay.
In his resignation letter, Jones said this: I cannot in good conscience ask my colleagues to expend precious time and energy defending or explaining my past. We need all hands on deck fighting for the future.